oil moves by tanker ship and it moves by rail. And those are much less efficient, more expensive ways to move with higher emissions. And so this is like one of those total no-brainers, really, regardless of what the price of oil is. But I think in particular it would be short-sighted to stall it uh, because the price is not going to stay low forever. It's going to come back up, and we're going to say, "Oh, I wish we had that pipe coming down from Canada." And so I don't expect Congress to back off. In fact, I've been told that the House is going to vote on Keystone the week of January 5th when they come back, and we really need to keep the pressure on. That should be a very tough vote for Democrats, and we should try to get a big bipartisan number on that, so that when it goes over to the Senate, if the Senate votes the way it did last year on this, in that big sort of Mary Landrieu last stand to try to save her. They got 59. There are 4 of those Democrats who voted against it who lost and were replaced with pro-Keystone Republicans. So it would be at 63 votes, which of course is enough to get it on the president's desk, but it's not enough to override his veto. It'll still be 4 short of that. And there's also a question whether we'll have the veto override number in the House. And so this is an issue where if we want to finally see this through to victory after 6 years of waiting for a simple permit to be approved, we've got to really put some pressure on in the next few weeks and not let any of these politicians use the current low oil price as an excuse for a total nonsense, indefensible vote for America's national security and energy needs. And so I'm hoping that we'll get big numbers and maybe even veto-proof numbers and finally get this thing done. Of course, going back to what we were saying about big donors on the left, the president pretty clearly killed the Keystone Pipeline in a quid pro quo deal for Tom Steyer's $100 million. The deal was cooked up at his house at a big Democratic fundraiser. And I just hope that that deal expired with the election and that they didn't commit to do this damage to the country permanently for his one-time infusion of political cash, which, by the way, didn't really do much to help Democrats. All this talk about big money buying elections and all the rest of it, the Democrats outspent Republicans badly in this election cycle, and they still got wiped out.
I was going to mention Steyer earlier when we were joking about the Koch brothers, but of course, crickets from Harry Reid and Obama and the Democrats as it relates to Steyer and the money there. Also, Phil, I think that the State Department report completely irrelevant to the left because it doesn't fit the narrative. And you're right on. I mean, regardless of the cost of a barrel of oil right now, be it 50 or 100 or 150, it's short-sighted because the issue is domestic production. Well, Canada from oil certainly versus the Middle East, and jobs here. So it will be interesting if what you said is correct. House passes the bill. Democrats pass the bill. I'm sorry, the Senate passes the bill. It gets to Obama's desk. My guess is he would veto it because if we think this guy circled the wagons prior to the midterms, I mean, he's given us every indication that he's even reinforcing it now, right? He doesn't give a damn about what any of us think. I mean, he's going to do what he's going to do, and apparently he comes down, not on the side of unions, who have chastised him for opposing the pipeline, but environmentalists, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I found this clip. It's somewhere on our YouTube channel, and you got to teach me how to promote YouTube channels. I got to call that guy you told me to talk to. But I found this clip. It was from a speech that Tom Steyer gave at Berkeley, where he kind of explained why they had made the Keystone Pipeline like this all-time litmus test fight.
Right.
Even though the State Department says that building it actually reduces global warming, and he had this explanation. He said, "This is our Pearl Harbor moment, and we need to have this huge, iconic public victory, and we've decided to make the fight over Keystone. And if we stop the Keystone Pipeline, we'll get a carbon tax. That's a given. We'll get all the rest of our global warming agenda." And so they've kind of decided that this is the moment they prove their sort of political throw weight, if you will. They show that they can stop something that, all the merits aside, they can do it on sort of sheer political will and show the strength of the whole global warming movement and what have you. And then they think it'll kind of all be downhill from there, and they'll get all the rest of their policy agenda. And so they've built this up into something that's enormous and has accorded sort of this enormous symbolic, political, and strategic value for them, kind of totally detached from what the actual merits of the project are and what the actual environmental impact is.
Yeah, detached from the narrative. I mean, that's part and parcel. Now, I'm looking at the clock, Phil, and I know we're going to run out of time. But two things I wanted to do. One, I want to talk about this Medicaid thing, and then let you talk about your book and Pimp American Commitment a bit. This one, I think it just went up today. You wrote it yourself. Medicaid's perverse funding formula. Now, this is the kind of thing that, if you're at a cocktail party over the holidays, and as you're reaching across for your second eggnog, maybe adding a little bit more rum, and you say, well, there's a perverse formula in Medicaid, everybody in the room goes to sleep. So explain what this is, and more importantly, why is it important and why should people care?
Well, everyone remembers all the dirty, corrupt deals they used to get Obamacare past the finish line, and probably the most famous one was the Cornhusker kickback to get Ben Nelson. And what Ben Nelson basically said when he was the last Democratic holdout on this bill was he said, I'm not going to be for this if you impose any costs at all on my state of Nebraska for the Medicaid expansion. And they said, well, okay, and they sort of wrote into the bill that for Nebraska and Nebraska only, the Medicaid expansion would be 100% funded with federal dollars. The state wouldn't have to kick in any money. Now, when this got exposed, and there was all the, everyone was talking about how evil and corrupt it was that they bought this guy's vote and all this kind of thing, he came out and he sort of threw his hands in the air and he said, oh, no, you misunderstood. That was just a placeholder. That was just it just says Nebraska in there to remind people that I was the one who put it in, but it wasn't really supposed to just be for Nebraska, and we're going to fix it now, and we're going to give the same deal to all 50 states. And so, to save face for him and how dirty that deal looked, they did, in fact, rewrite it. And so the way it works right now is any state that does the Medicaid expansion, and the Supreme Court made it voluntary, originally it was mandatory, but any state that does the Medicaid expansion, for the expansion population, the funding is 100% federal dollars versus regular Medicaid, which is about 57%. Different states have different match rates, but it's about 57% federal dollars. The states have to come up with the rest of it. The other 43% have to come up. The states have to cough up the dollars. And so you've got this weird situation now. It's almost, I think it's indefensible, but you've got this weird situation now where for people who are in traditional Medicaid, which is children, poor children, and disabled people, sort of the truly needy that are in traditional Medicaid, states have to pay a lot of the money themselves. The feds only put up, 57% on average. But if you expand your Medicaid program under Obamacare to childless adults, people who are not disabled, people who don't have children, who in my judgment should be working, which is why I'm against the Medicaid expansion in the first place. But if you add these people to Medicaid, if you add able-bodied adults to Medicaid, then the feds pick up 100% of the tab. And so you have this crazy incentive now in the states where if they're trying to cut their budget or make their budget balanced, they've got this incentive to sign up as many healthy adults as possible and to actually cut Medicaid benefits for sick children and the disabled. And I just think that's so crazy that wherever people are on the political spectrum, we ought to say, look, the federal match rate is going to be something in between those two numbers, but it's going to be the same for your whole program. We're not going to have these two different rates.
But you know what? That's part and parcel to everything Obama does as it relates to entitlements. I mean, you go down and you look at the record number of people on SNAP, food stamps. You look at the record number of people on Social Security disability. I used to be in the financial planning business, and it was tough as hell for people to qualify. Now, they qualify like crazy. You look at Obama 2010, suspending welfare to work laws. Is it not the intent, or do you believe, Phil, of the left to increase the permanent underclass in this country as much as possible, and hopefully, obviously, get that in excess of 50% and have every one of those people vote? I mean, this is what this is really all about, is it not? Redistribution of wealth and creating a class beholden to the federal government, man.
Well, I don't know if it's intentional strategy on their part or if these bad policies just have that effect. But either way, you're exactly right that we're fostering a new dependency, and it's very unfortunate because in the 90s there was a pretty clear consensus that eventually emerged that we ought to be getting people off of welfare and onto work as much as possible, and Democrats
Sure,
joined in with
but
that as well as
when
Republicans.
Obama did that
And
in
now it's
2000,
all been reversed. It's all been reversed, and we've got a situation now where not just the Obama administration, but increasingly and unfortunately a lot of Republican governors as well, people like John Kasich in Ohio and most recently Bill Haslam in Tennessee, are touting adding hundreds of thousands of able-bodied childless adults to the Medicaid welfare rolls as if that's some kind of achievement. And we've got these guys talking about how wonderful it is that we've added however many million people to the Medicaid rolls, like that's a success story of Obamacare. And, actually the most recent economic research on the impact of adding able-bodied adults to the Medicaid rolls shows the exact same kind of dependency trap that we saw with other welfare programs historically. There was a very good study done by the National Bureau of Economic Research on Wisconsin, which had added added adults to their Medicaid rolls and then froze that expansion. They did this before Obamacare, so we have sort of before and after data from that state, sort of a natural experiment. And they found that if you add adults to your Medicaid rolls, if you add able-bodied adults to your Medicaid rolls, they are 10% more likely to be unemployed a year later than if you didn't. And it makes sense if you think about it. You're going to lose your free government health care if you go get a job. Is a very bad incentive to give people. And, of course, as you pointed out, in many cases that's stacked on top of a bunch of other government benefit programs. And so they sort of add up to the point where a lot of people feel trapped that if they go and get a job, they're going to have a big decline in their standard of living, and it's going to take years of building up their income
facts are
before they can
stubborn
make up
things
for it.
because, again, suspend welfare to work requirements in October 2010. Within 10 months, the number of adults on welfare in this country doubled. Maybe that was not overtly an attempt, I believe, on purpose. But when you look at the track record of him and how he talks in wealth redistribution, maybe I'm just a tad more cynical. But I believe, yeah, it's intentional.
Well, I mean, I don't. There's no way to know that unless we got some smoking gun memo or something like that. So you might be right. We don't need to know that to know that it's a bad policy and it's hurting
Right.
people. And you can't. You're not going to make people better off by having them dependent on government programs forever, as well intentioned or not, as these policies may be. And so, I think that every government benefit program of any kind, if it's for people who are able-bodied and capable of work, it needs to have a work requirement, and that is a moral necessity, not just a fiscal necessity. That's not just a matter of getting freeloaders off the rolls or whatever cost-saving measure for taxpayers. It's also greatly in the interests of the people who are on these programs, so that they won't become permanently dependent, so that they'll be working and they can preferably get to real private sector work sooner rather than later. And I really hope that we can get back to that consensus from the 90s in favor of work, because I think the direction that we're going now, where so many of these Republicans are now finding it irresistible to take this federal money and they're expanding these programs, especially Medicaid, it's very disturbing. It's sort of the emergence of a new bipartisan consensus in favor of government welfare, and I really think we have to fight hard against that.
Yeah, it just, to me, it bespeaks, whether intended or not, there are consequences, unintended consequences that occur as a result that oftentimes end up to be far, far more harmful than even the problems that it was intended to fix. Now, look, Phil, we've got, I just got a note from the producer. We've got 1 minute left. So you got 1 minute. Mention your book, a little bit more about American Commitment, and then we've got to run off.
Yeah, I mean, the book is 3 years old now, so it's out of date, but I did predict a lot of the things we've seen in the past few years. The book was about how Obama was going to ignore the 2010 election in the Republican House and push forward on his entire agenda through abuse of executive and regulatory power, and I think anyone who's paying attention knows that's largely what's happened over the past 4 years. So I'm pretty proud of the book, even though it's kind of out of date right now. But I'm really focused on building the organization now, and folks could go to AmericanCommitment.org and sign up and start getting our emails and become active in the things we're doing. We had, as I sort of gave you the rundown of our big 2014 successes, but I'm pretty proud of what we've done, and 2015 is going to be another big year, so I hope that everyone will be part of what we're doing.
All right, Phil, thanks a lot. This is The Right Mics. We will be right back.
Thanks, Phil.
This is your Vigilant Liberty Radio News from Independent Journal Review for Friday, December 19th.